Okay, this is the 75th episode of the Mind Your Noodles podcast. If you're listening to this through the podcast as opposed to YouTube, which is the video and why you see me moving around, is I now do video. I have the podcast, and I will soon, maybe even starting today, start a blog based on this information. I did actually a blog for about 6 years, and I used to post every day, but I didn't get that much out of it. And video seems to be something that more people prefer to get their information. But if you're driving in a car, obviously that would be very difficult. So change of music for the intro, so you'll be able to tell the difference between when I was more focused on the neuroscience of things, and now with the new music starting, you'll be able to differentiate between when I pivoted on the podcast. So I used to do very long intros. If you listen to the Deming Institute podcast that I do, I thought that was the cool thing because I listen to people's podcasts and you get very long intros, those types of things. But I noticed a kind of a trend lately that those seem to be shortening. And with my audience being executives who don't like to sit around for, 30 seconds listening to what the podcast is necessarily about. So I'm going to get right into it. We focused for the first 74 episodes on neuroscience, and really that's the why you think the way that you do. A lot of the focus of understanding the neuroscience, and I just didn't think that was a broad enough umbrella to look at your thinking more broadly as far as how it impacts your organization. I think it's helpful. I think there's a ton of things you use. I mean, if you use the executive education program I put together, you'll find that. One of the other changes that I've made is I've updated the Mind Your Noodles podcast website and the 95method.com website, and they kind of will connect back and forth between the two. You might find some redundant information at the Mind Your Noodles podcast, but the 95 Method, for instance, will link to the Mind Your Noodles podcast because I'm not going to put it in two different places. More information about the 95 Method at the95method.com, and you can take a look for yourself and see what the differences are. I know I'm making lots of changes over the next 2 to 4 weeks, in that I started some of the changes over the weekend. But I think the aim is still the same. Matter of fact, this is the thing when you go to the 95 Method website, the aim, or what the saying maybe would be a better word, is change the way you think, change the results you see. And that's really what the focus is. Maybe an aim, as I've written it, is help make executives and their organizations more effective through better methods. And those better methods about synthetic thinking, being able to look at a system, being able to construct an aim from the knowledge that you gain, decision making, innovation, executive data analytics, and organizational design. Those to me are the leverage points and the focus of this particular podcast, as well as the focus of what our organization is about, is making more effective executives. Now, I've had people write me that have said, oh, you're pivoting to just look at executives. I'm not really an executive. I'm not an existing executive. I'm not a new executive. I'm not an aspiring executive. Well, all these things are going to impact you. And if you have executives out making the wrong decisions about things, and this was going to affect maybe your organization's ability to survive, or it also will create a way for you to create value in your organization, no matter what your aspirations are within the organization. So that's kind of the focus of this. Well, it is the focus of this. Now, I talk a little bit about what our dimensions of thinking are in order to get to improve performance in an organization. And there's the concept of being efficient. And I think it's important to go through this definition. There's the concept of being efficient versus being effective. So let's just a couple of things here. So you could be very efficient at running a meeting, but if the meeting is focused on the wrong things, then that efficiency isn't very effective. And some people use the metaphor of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. And that's kind of the concept. You can look really good. And this is one of the reasons why I want to differentiate this podcast and these videos and my training is not about leadership. There's thousands, literally thousands of podcasts on leadership, blogs and things of that sort. Mine is not about leadership. And I'm not saying that that isn't important. It is important. Leadership is very important. But my focus is on giving you methods to improve not only your thinking, but the organization, the way that it thinks, and develop theory based on things that I've learned over the years. And your beliefs may be different, and that's fine. The whole idea is to expand you as I get expanded too by researching and doing different things. So I want to differentiate that most of the executives that I run into are very efficient thinkers. They were experts as engineers or operations or finance or whatever it might be, but they're not effective. And the reason they're not effective is because they don't have, in my opinion, they don't have methods to help kind of take it to the next level. You have to become, in my opinion, an effective, in order to become an effective executive, you have to be a synthetic thinker. That's step one from my perspective. How do I look at the entire system and not just the department that I came out of when I became an executive? So I need to get you as an executive, a veteran executive, new executive, aspiring executive, or an employee that just wants to get better as looking at things much differently than the way that maybe you look at them today. So doing things right versus doing the right thing. And so in this episode, I want to focus on an article and actually a book by Peter Drucker called The Effective Executive. I read it many years ago for my management classes and in my MBA program, and it's an excellent book. It was written in 1967, or probably written in 66, but released in 67 by Dr. Peter Drucker. And he talks in terms of 8, I think he references them as practices. So the 8 things that you need to be an effective executive are what needs to be done, what is right for the enterprise. Then they develop an action plan. You take responsibility for your decisions, your responsibility for communicating, focused on opportunities rather than problems, ran productive meetings, and said we versus I when they're communicating. And I want to focus on the first 2, which is what needs to be done and what is right for the enterprise. And these, to me, are, this is where we're missing method. In my opinion, he doesn't really provide a method. He points at a few things that I'll get to here in just a second, but he's not providing us with a method to get things done. Now, this article that I'm pulling this from, rather than the book, was written for the Harvard Business Review back in 2004, and you can I'll put a link to it. I believe Harvard Business Review still allows you to go to these articles, even if you're not a subscriber. And if you're an executive, be a subscriber to Harvard Business Review. I'm not saying everything that they have there is great, but there is information to keep you up to date on what's going on. But I believe they give you maybe 5 or 10 articles a month that you can read, or a quarter, or whatever the number is. So you should be able to get to this article. Unless you've used your quota of articles, then you will have to wait a month or whatever. So focusing in on what needs to be done and what is right for the enterprise, go down to looking at opportunities versus problems. And he outlines a few things. I don't necessarily agree with what he says about not focusing on problems, but let me just go through these things and we'll talk about it. But an unexpected success or failure in their own enterprise, in a competing enterprise, or in the industry. Now, these are where you're looking for the opportunities. A gap between what is and what could be in a market, process, product, or service. Innovation in a process, product, or service, whether inside or outside the enterprise or its industry. Changes in industry structure and market structure, changes in demographics, changes in mindset, values, perception, mood, or meaning, and new knowledge or a new technology. So these are some of the things where he's saying, well, look for opportunities in these things in order to become an effective executive. And I think these are really good things, but he doesn't really provide you a method to do it. And that's where this particular podcast and what we want to be able to do is provide method to make you a more effective executive by looking at the way that you think, and also providing you method to help with that thinking. And so I believe that what we've put together in the executive education program, now I'm going to put a little plug in here, you can download at the95method.com/starter kit. I have an effective executive starter kit, and it'll take you through very high level what's covered in a broader program. But it'll give you an opportunity to see a method that you go through to go from being from doing things right to doing the right thing, and have a method to do that. That's a focus of the executive education program. I would say that the things that Dr. Drucker has laid out in this article and in his book are good. But again, we're missing method, and you need a method to do this, to get an understanding, to be able to innovate, to be able to make better decisions, to design your organization, to look at data, and that's a focus, or even constructing the aim from. But it all begins with an understanding of the system that you work in, and this is the synthetic thinking portion. Now, I've talked before about people most of us are all analytical thinkers, but as you become an executive, you need to think more broadly about your system, and starting very, what I would call probably foundational or elementary, is going from that departmental thinking that you had when you were an engineer or in finance or whatever it is, and moving to looking at the broader organization. And more importantly, as we start to talk about synthetic thinking, the interaction of the parts. How does engineering interact with finance to create good service? Now, the whole approach here is, first of all, getting an understanding of what's important to customers. And so we look through a customer lens in order to accomplish that. Looking through that customer lens will help you see some of the gaps, that will let you see some of the things that are going on. Now, it won't help you innovate per se, because it will help you improve your performance, but it won't necessarily help you innovate, because innovation is something that's newer. It was the saying of W. Edwards Deming that no one ever asked for a light bulb. You have to have deep knowledge of your business in order to innovate. Here we're talking in terms of looking at your organization as a system through a customer lens to get a necessary understanding of what our performance is and how the interaction of the parts are operating in that system. So that's the first part. The second part then is getting into what our thinking is. How do we think about the organization? And two leverage points that I talk about quite a bit are our motivation and control. Those two things make up a large percentage, depending on your organization. I'm not going to quote a percentage. That's something for that you would need to do. Is affecting the performance that the customers see and the performance of even having a method to go into innovation. What you're thinking about this stuff. And that's really what the executive education program is about. But getting back to Drucker's article, I think it's good to lay the foundation of the knowledge that you need in order to become an effective executive and have a method to do it. And you may have one. If you do, great. Keep with it. But it goes down to what needs to be done. And that's not necessarily just what the boss says. Or if you're an executive, possibly the CEO of the company or the president of the company, and what is right for the enterprise. And this is the type of thing that we supply you as a method to do that. So, one of the things that I've learned is people have to enter this on their own. I will not be able to change your thinking. And neuroscience tells us this, right? Even psychology tells us this. Your thinking is embedded in some of the things that have been successful for you. And there's certain other things that you're going to avoid because we're very risk averse types of people. What I'm attempting to supply here is that I can't change your thinking, but I'm going to give you methods to go through in order to change your own thinking. And that is really the difference here, is how do you go about changing your own thinking? Well, if you start to look through a customer lens, you're going to see something a little bit different than maybe what you expected. And then as you get into the thinking lens, now you're talking in terms of, okay, so it's been set up that way, or the employee thinks that way, or the customer thinks that way. Why is that? What are we doing typically around motivation and control, but it can be many other things. What are we doing in our organization creating the type of performance that we're getting today? And as you go through this process, it's not to be critical. I don't have the perfect answer for you. You do. I'm providing you a method to go through and look at those things so that you can begin to look at things differently. And I think that that's the difference here is the innovation comes about by you absorbing the information that I'm providing, and then using that information in a way to come up with new ways of doing things that are potentially better. Now, you're going to go through failures too, right? We just don't want to blow up the whole system. If we're going to be an effective executive, we want to do things on a small scale before we start rolling out and blowing up the whole organization if it's the wrong thing to do. The other thing is you can't do it top down. You will ultimately have to get people involved, but you do that by developing what I call a system map from this customer lens and from this thinking lens, and then being able to pull in other people to help look at, do they see the same thing you do? Because the more people that do, and especially if you get a critical mass of people within the organization seeing things the same way you're seeing them, as you look through the customer lens, as you look through the thinking lens and saying, what else could we do? Maybe what other thinking do we need to change in our organization in order to get better? And then try that on a small scale in order to make it better. So this is the Effective Executive. I think is an excellent book. Please read it. I think it's really good. Or as a substitute, potentially the article, the 2004 article that I'll put a link to in the show notes. But I think these things are the ones that support what an effective executive should be doing, but doesn't provide you with the method. And again, to be redundant, I believe that what we're trying to build here in the podcast, what we're trying to build with the executive education program, is something that you can follow. It's imperfect. I will be the first to admit it. It's not a perfect system, but getting that synthetic thinking of looking through the customer lens and the thinking lens will then lay the foundation where then you can construct a solid aim, and then we can start to add the other modules into the training on decision making and innovation and executive data analytics and organizational design. Step one, understand yourself. Understand how you think, how your organization thinks, and knowing thyself is a good place to start. So that was it for this week. These are going to be more and deeper discussions about what's going on with our thinking and organizations. I think you'll get quite a bit out of it as you listen to these as we move forward. And as I will mention again, and probably be in the outro too, is please go to the 95method.com/starter kit, and you get kind of a good overview in 5 videos. It's less than 45 minutes. You could watch one each day. Takes, I think the length of them are anywhere from 5 to maybe 15 minutes in length, and give you a sense of kind of the starter kit for being an effective executive. And it's free. You just have to, people then say, well, it's not really free because I have to provide an email. Yes, you have to provide an email if you have interest. But, if you subscribe to something, I always have an unsubscribe button if it's something that just doesn't fit you. But it will take you through some exercises to help you through what the executive education program is about, what the podcast is about, and what we're going to be doing moving forward. So thank you, and I will talk to you again next week.